So, AI ethics. You hear that term everywhere, right? It's all over the news, it's plastered on corporate mission statements, it's just out there. But let's be honest, it can feel like this big, kind of vague cloud of an idea. We all know it's important, sure, but what does it actually mean in the real world?
Okay, so let's actually answer that question. In this explainer, we are going to cut right through all the noise. We're going to unpack AI ethics into a really simple but powerful framework that you can actually use to understand the tech that's shaping our world.
And here's the absolute key to understanding it all. AI ethics isn't just one single concept. The best way to think about it is as two distinct but totally inseparable layers. You just can't have one without the other.
So on one side, you've got the ought. This is all about our shared values. Think of it like an architect's blueprint for a better world, where we lay out principles like, human rights and fairness. But then, on the other side, you have the how, and that's the governance. This is the nitty-gritty, the practical building code, all the rules and systems that turn that beautiful blueprint into something real, something that actually stands up. Okay, so for our first section, let's take a look back, because this whole conversation is way older than you might think. Today's debates about AI ethics are really just standing on the shoulders of decades and decades of deep thinking about technology, and you can see a really clear progression on this timeline. I mean, all the way back in the 1950s, people were already warning about what automation might do to society. By the 70s and 80s, whole fields like computer ethics popped up to deal with the policy vacuums that new tech was creating. Fast forward to the 2010s, and the conversation shifts to data and algorithms. And then, 2022 happened. ChatGPT was released, and suddenly the need for actual governance was put into hyperdrive.
All that history wasn't for nothing. It's actually led to a pretty surprising amount of global agreement on the fundamental principles, the ought of what ethical AI should even look like.
In fact, it's pretty wild. When researchers looked at hundreds of different AI ethics guidelines from companies and governments all over the globe, they found this amazing convergence. The same 8 central ideas just kept popping up again and again. And here they are. These 8 things really form what you might call a bundle concept for ethical AI. It's not about just picking and choosing one. It's about a total commitment to all of them. Things like preventing harm, making sure things are fair, and, of course, having transparency and real human oversight. But here's the crucial point. While all 8 of these are important, 2 of them are the absolute bedrock. First, you have to have a moral compass, a clear, solid grounding in human rights and values. And second, you need a real system for accountability to make sure those values are actually being followed. Seriously, without both of those, the other principles just kind of fall apart. Okay, so let's dive into what is probably the biggest challenge in this entire field. We've got the principles, right? That's our ought. But how in the world do we get to the how? How do we turn these nice-sounding ideas into actual, concrete actions? This quote just nails the problem perfectly. It's what everyone in the field calls the principles to practice gap. Without strong ways to hold people and systems accountable, all these beautiful principles can easily become just marketing talk. A shiny veneer that hides the fact that nothing is really changing. So how do we bridge this gap? Well, the solution is to create what researchers call empirical reference. Now that sounds super academic, I know, but it's actually a pretty simple idea. We just need tangible proof. We need observable, real-world stuff that shows us that ethics is actually being done, not just talked about. And this is a brilliant illustration of what that proof looks like in practice. It's not just talk, it's actual documentation. Things like model cards, which are basically like a nutrition label for an AI model, or formal algorithmic impact assessments, which force developers to stop and think about potential societal harm before they push something out into the world. These are the tools that make ethics measurable and real. And here's what that actually looks like. On the left, you've got a hospital's AI that went through rigorous bias testing and has a human in the loop. That's ethics in action. On the right, you have a classic black box hiring algorithm with zero transparency. The key takeaway here is that the difference isn't the AI technology itself. It's the governance system, or the total lack of one, that's built around it.
Now, as you can probably guess, this whole field is just buzzing with passionate debate and some really deep tensions. I mean, getting this right is not easy, and there are major disagreements about the best path forward.
And one of the biggest fights right now is the one against ethics washing. This is the huge difference between substantive ethics, which means real, measurable change, and performative ethics, which is when companies just use the language of ethics to look good and, frankly, to try and hold off actual regulation. And the challenges here go even deeper. The field is constantly struggling with that principles to practice gap. But it's also working really hard to avoid a purely Western-centric view of what values even means. And it's wrestling with the legacy of data colonialism, making sure AI doesn't just repeat old patterns of power and exploitation.
So, after all that, the history, the core principles, the practical tools, and the big debates, where does that leave us? Let's try to pull it all together into one clear, actionable definition of what AI ethics really is.
Here we go. AI ethics is a practice. It's something you do. It's about guiding AI systems from the very first line of code to their last day in operation. And its whole goal is to protect human rights and promote justice, not with some vague promises, but through measurable governance mechanisms.
And we can even break that down into this 5-part framework. It's basically a checklist you can use to think ethically about any AI system. You have to ask, what values are we protecting? What could go wrong here? Is ethics built in from start to finish? Who's accountable when something breaks? And does this actually respect the cultural context where it's being used?
Which brings us to our final thought. You now have the tools to look past all the hype. So think about the AI you use every single day. Can you find the proof? Can you spot those measurable, real-world signs? Those empirical references that tell you it was actually built with ethics in mind?